It was just after 4 a.m. in Nottingham. Two students walking home, a school caretaker on his morning drive, and a man carrying knives with a plan to kill. By sunrise, 3 people were dead, 3 more injured, and the country asking, how was this even possible? He was known to police, warned about by doctors, diagnosed with a serious mental illness, and yet no one stopped him. This is the story of Valdo Calacone and the catastrophic failures that led to one of the UK's most shocking attacks. So how did it all begin? Let's go back to where the story really starts. Valdo Calacone was born in Guinea-Bissau, West Africa in 1991. At a young age, he moved to Portugal with his family and later settled in the United Kingdom. By all appearances, he lived a normal family life. For a time, he studied at the University of Nottingham, enrolling in a mechanical engineering course, but as the years went on, something changed. In May of 2020, Calacone was formally diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a severe mental health condition known for its symptoms of delusions, hallucinations, and disordered thinking. He was sectioned under the Mental Health Act more than once, and his condition didn't go unnoticed. In fact, it triggered growing concern amongst healthcare professionals who warned repeatedly that he posed a serious risk, not just to himself, but to others. One doctor reportedly warned that Calacone might one day kill someone if he wasn't properly treated and monitored. But despite these red flags, he was released back into the community time and time again. He stopped engaging with services, and his family said he became increasingly isolated, paranoid, and unpredictable. He was even wanted by police for assaulting a police officer in 2022, yet remained at large. By the spring of 2023, Calacone was living a transient lifestyle. He had no fixed abode, no job, and very little contact with mental health services. There were warnings, loud ones, but no one intervened in a way that made a difference. What's more disturbing is Calacone wasn't an unknown danger. He was a known one. The system had its eyes on him, and still, it failed to prevent what would happen next. In the early hours of June 13th, 2023, he would take to the streets of Nottingham, armed with 2 knives and a metal pole. His intent was clear. The attack was just moments away. It was just after midnight on June 13th, 2023. Valdo Calacone had arrived in Nottingham hours earlier, carrying 2 large kitchen knives and a metal pole hidden in his backpack. Surveillance footage would later show him walking alone, slowly, aimlessly, but it wasn't random. He was hunting. At around 4 a.m, Calacone was seen on Ilkeston Road, a street in the quiet part of the city. He lingered there in the dark, concealed behind a wall, waiting. That's when Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kamar appeared, 2 first-year university students, both 19 years old, walking home after a night out. They were just minutes from their accommodation. As they passed the corner of Ilkeston Road, Calacone emerged from the shadows and attacked without warning. He stabbed Barnaby first, then Grace. Witnesses nearby reported hearing a single scream, high-pitched and desperate. Grace reportedly tried to fight back, using her body to shield her friend, but the attack was frenzied. It was over in seconds. By the time emergency services arrived, both Barnaby and Grace were already gone, killed in cold blood. The scene was horrific. Blood on the pavement, 2 lives full of promise cut brutally short. But Calacone wasn't finished. Roughly an hour later, at 5:04 a.m, Ian Coates was driving to work. He was a beloved school caretaker, 65 years old, with just a few months left until retirement. As he drove down Magdala Road, Calacone intercepted him. There was a struggle. Calacone stabbed Ian multiple times, 15 in total. Then, he stole his van. Ian died at the scene. Calacone now had a vehicle, and he intended to use it. He drove erratically through the city, and just minutes later, at 5:14 a.m, he spotted a group of pedestrians on Milton Street. Without hesitation, he accelerated. He struck 3 people, Wayne Burkett, Sharon Miller, and Marcin Goronsky, with terrifying force. CCTV showed bodies being flung into the air. The victims suffered serious, life-changing injuries, and yet again, Calacone did not stop. Police were already responding to the earlier stabbings. Now they were dealing with a hit and run, and a city gripped by chaos. By 5:35 a.m, armed police located the stolen van. It had crashed into a lorry on Maple Street. Calacone was still inside. The police approached the vehicle cautiously. He refused to cooperate. They broke through the window and tasered him before they dragged him out and placed him under arrest. The knife was still in the van, blood still on his clothes. By sunrise, the true scale of what had happened began to emerge. 3 people were dead, 3 others injured, and the city of Nottingham, a quiet university town, had become the scene of one of the most shocking mass attacks in modern British history. For the families, the nightmare had just begun. For the police, questions were mounting. But for prosecutors and for the country, there was one question louder than all of the others. How did a man with known mental health, previous arrests, and multiple warnings go on to kill 3 people in one single morning? In the hours after his arrest, Valdo Calacone remained in police custody. He refused to answer questions. He gave no motive, but what followed was one of the most controversial legal decisions in recent British criminal history. Just days after the attack on June 16, 2023, Calacone was formally charged with 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. The Crown Prosecutor Service made it clear this was a high-profile, high-stakes case. The country was watching. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Doctors had already begun psychiatric evaluations, and what they found led the prosecution down a very different legal path. Calacone was quickly deemed unfit to stand trial for murder due to his long-documented diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. By November 2023, prosecutors accepted his plea of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, a legal term that means the defendant's mental illness significantly impaired his judgment at the time of the crime. The public reaction was immediate and emotional. Many believed that justice was being diluted, that the term diminished responsibility couldn't possibly account for the horror and precision of what he had done. The families of the victims were blindsided. Some hadn't even been told the plea deal was being considered. On January 25, 2024, Valdo Calacone was sentenced at Nottingham Crown Court. He did not receive a prison sentence. Instead, the judge issued a hospital order under Section 37 of the Mental Health Act, with a restriction order under Section 41. In simple terms, he was sent to a high-security psychiatric facility, possible for life. The court heard from medical experts who testified that Calacone's schizophrenia had been severe and untreated in the lead-up to the attacks. He had stopped taking medication, he had refused therapy, and he had become dangerously delusional. Justice Pepperall, the presiding judge, stated that although the attacks were intentional and brutal, there was no doubt that Calacone was very seriously mentally unwell. He described it as an irreducible minimum of responsibility, but not a full one. For the victims' families, the distinction meant very little. They had lost sons, daughters, and fathers, and the man responsible would never serve a day in prison. Emma Webber, Barnaby's mother, described the sentence as a betrayal. In court, she said, "I now carry pure rage and hatred. It is exhausting. The legal system has failed us. You failed our children." And she wasn't alone. Families called for an urgent review of how prosecutors made their decisions and why they hadn't been properly informed all along the way. In the months that followed, those questions would lead to a nationwide conversation about justice, about accountability, and about how a system designed to protect people had let so many people down. As the courtroom emptied and Valdo Calacone was transferred to a high-security psychiatric hospital, the focus shifted from what he had done to what others had failed to do. This case wasn't just about one man. It became a symbol of a wider crisis, a system that had been warned again and again and still allowed a dangerous individual to slip through the cracks. Let's start with the mental health system. A review by the Care Quality Commission found what is called a series of errors, omissions, and missed opportunities. Calacone had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia as early as 2020. He was sectioned multiple times, but he repeatedly disengaged from treatment, and despite warning signs, including a mental health professional explicitly stating he could kill someone, no decisive long-term intervention was made. He was discharged. He disappeared from the system. No follow-ups, no enforcement, no safeguards. But if it wasn't just healthcare, law enforcement was also aware of Calacone. In September 2022, he assaulted a police officer in an unprovoked attack. A warrant was issued for his arrest, but he was never found. Police later admitted that the case wasn't a priority, and officers didn't actively search for him. Let that sink in. A man with a violent history, known mental illness, and an active arrest warrant was walking free. 9 months later, he killed 3 people. The victims' families were furious, and they weren't alone. The public began asking difficult questions. Politicians called for an inquiry. Media outlets ran exposés, and a new debate exploded around the legal use of diminished responsibility and whether it's applied too quickly without true oversight. In response to the mounting pressure, the government announced a full public inquiry in May 2025. Its scope is wide. It will examine police actions, NHS mental health services, the Crown Prosecution Service, and multi-agency communication breakdowns dating all the way back to 2019. The Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC, also launched a parallel investigation into Nottinghamshire Police, focusing on the failure to act on Calacone's outstanding warrant. But for the victims' families, these inquiries are too late. They've said it so clearly. No report will bring their children back. What they want, more than anything, is for this never to happen again. The Nottingham attacks were not just a tragedy, they were a failure. One made in slow motion, across months and years, by a system that was warned and looked away. In the days following the attacks, grief swept across Nottingham and the country. But for the family of those killed, grief quickly turned into something else. Disbelief, heartbreak and rage. Barnaby Webber was just 19, a talented cricketer, kind, funny, full of life. His family described him as a beautiful, brilliant son, with his whole future ahead of him. Grace O'Malley Kamar was also 19, a medical student, a gifted hockey player who had once saved a man's life with CPR. She died trying to protect her friend, brave until the very end. Ian Coates was 65, a father, a grandfather, a school caretaker who loved fishing and football. He was on his way to work, doing what he'd done faithfully for years. Each victim left behind shattered families, devastated communities, and futures that will never be lived. The 3 survivors, Wayne Burkett, Sharon Miller, and Marcin Goronsky, were left with life-changing injuries. Some can no longer walk properly, others left permanent trauma. They were random targets, who now carry scars for the rest of their lives. Barnaby's mother, Emma Webber, has become one of the most outspoken voices of justice. In public statements, she described her grief as a vortex of hell. She has vowed to fight for legal reform, so that no other family has to go through what hers has. Other families have echoed the same call for accountability, for better mental health care, and for a justice system that truly listens to victims. 3 lives taken, 3 more forever altered, and an entire country left asking why. and how this was ever allowed to happen. What happened in Nottingham in the 13th of June 2023 wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a result of repeated failures across healthcare, policing, prosecution, and communication. A dangerous individual slipped through every net. Warnings were ignored, systems broke down, and innocent people paid the ultimate price. This case forces us to ask hard questions. Should someone with a history of violent episodes and paranoid schizophrenia have been allowed to disappear from the mental health system? Should police have prioritised his arrest for a prior assault? And should the justice system have accepted a plea deal without properly consulting the victims' families? These aren't just procedural errors, they're missed chances to save lives. There are no easy answers. Mental illness is complex, the law is complicated, but one thing is clear: there has to be accountability, not just for the attacker, but for those who had the power to stop him and didn't. Today, the families of Barnaby, Grace, and Ian continue to push for change, not because it will bring their loved ones back, but because they believe no one else should have to suffer what they endured. On this channel, we believe that true crime isn't about shock value. It's about truth, it's about respect, and it's about understanding the systems behind these tragedies so we can question them, challenge them, and maybe even prevent the next one. If you found this video informative, please consider subscribing. I cover cases like this every week with compassion, research, and a focus on the facts. Thank you for watching, and above all, remember the names Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar, and Ian Coates. Say their names, share their stories. They deserve better.